Imagine taking the food pyramid you were taught in elementary school. The one with that massive foundational base of healthy whole grains and vegetables and just a tiny, almost apologetic sliver of meat at the top.
Yeah, the classic USDA pyramid.
Right. Imagine taking that and just turning it completely upside down, because today we are doing a deep dive into the biological argument that those leafy greens you force down for your health might actually be fighting back, and that the fatty steak you fear might actually be the exact thing your body needs to heal.
It is a massive paradigm shift. I mean, it goes against almost everything we consider to be foundational nutritional science.
Totally. And as a listener who is just trying to be healthy today, it is incredibly overwhelming. You wake up on a Monday and a headline tells you saturated fat is a killer.
Right.
And by Wednesday, some new article says plant-based is the only way to avoid cancer. And by Friday, you're hearing that if your cholesterol isn't crushed to the absolute floor, you're just a walking time bomb.
Yeah, you're just constantly swimming in this disorienting sea of dietary mandates.
Exactly.
Which is exactly why today's mission is so compelling. We are unpacking a highly counter-narrative set of sources anchored by an interview with Dr. Paul Saladino.
Yeah, the carnivore MD.
Exactly. He's a double-board certified physician who initially gained this massive following by championing a strict 100% carnivore diet. But recently, he did something you almost never see in the dogmatic world of health and wellness.
Right. He publicly pivoted, which is wild.
He did. He completely evolved his stance, admitted he didn't have the whole picture, and changed his entire framework based on what his own biology was telling him.
I mean, we have to acknowledge it takes a lot of guts. His personal quest for health took him on just the wildest pendulum swing imaginable.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about a timeline where he starts as a sick kid puking up asthma medications at the dinner table. Then he becomes an emaciated, gas-plagued raw vegan. Then he flips to an all-meat strict carnivore. And finally, he lands on this highly controversial animal-based plus fruit advocacy. It's a total roller coaster.
It is. But the biology he uncovers at every single stop along that ride is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it really is.
We have a lot of ground to cover to make sense of this. We're going to explore evolutionary biology, the hidden drivers of autoimmune disease, the deeply misunderstood physiological role of insulin, and finally, the heavily conflicted and sometimes shocking history of our dietary guidelines.
So to understand the doctor he became and the conclusions he reached, I think we have to start by looking at the patient he was.
Right.
His childhood was basically defined by standard Western medicine. He grew up in a medical household. His dad was a doctor. His mom was a nurse.
A very conventional medical background.
Exactly. But despite being surrounded by healthcare professionals, he was not a healthy kid at all. He suffered from severe asthma, eczema all over his body, seasonal allergies, and he struggled with his weight.
And his early life is really a perfect microcosm of the default setting in modern medicine, which is, treat the symptom, ignore the system. According to the source material, he was heavily overmedicated from a very young age. Because of his asthma, he was taking a drug called theophylline.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one. What exactly does that do?
So it's an older class of asthma medication, a bronchodilator. It basically relaxes the muscles in the lungs and opens up the airways.
Okay, sounds helpful.
Well, it has a very narrow therapeutic index, meaning the difference between an effective dose and a toxic dose is incredibly small.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it can cause nausea, jitteriness, and a rapid heart rate. His parents would literally have to open the capsules and empty the powder into his applesauce just to trick him into taking it.
Ugh, which sounds awful.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the applesauce. The sources mentioned this really visceral story he tells about sitting at the dinner table eating pea soup.
Right, the pea soup story.
Yeah, his dad forced him to use an albuterol inhaler right there at the table. And it triggered such a severe gagging reaction that he just threw up his soup all over his plate.
Oh, man.
He was just completely overloaded with pharmaceuticals.
And the crucial takeaway from his childhood, and what he eventually realizes later in life, is that at no point did anyone pause to ask the fundamental question.
Which is?
Where is this illness actually coming from?
Right, like why are the airways inflamed in the first place?
Exactly. There was no consideration of his environment, no investigation into his food, no curiosity about the root causes of his systemic inflammation.
Just standard American diet stuff.
Right. He was eating a standard American diet, and the medical approach was purely suppressive. You have a symptom, we suppress it with a chemical. We have a rash, we put a steroid cream on it.
So he grows up. And before he even goes to medical school, he's working as a cardiology physician assistant. And he decides he's going to take matters into his own hands because the standard medical approach just isn't fixing his lifelong eczema or asthma.
So he tries something radical.
Yeah, he tries a raw vegan diet. He
Right.
commits to this for 7 solid months. And reading through the sources, well, the results are just an absolute disaster.
It was a physiological catastrophe. He lost 20 pounds of lean muscle mass.
Wow.
At 5'9", his weight dropped down to 145 pounds, sometimes even less. He described himself as looking completely gaunt, just losing all his vitality.
And the gastrointestinal issues. I know we're talking about serious medical topics here, but you kind of have to laugh at the sheer reality of what happened to him.
Oh, it's wild.
He was working in a very small cardiology clinic alongside a nurse practitioner and another PA. And his flatulence was so uncontrollable and so noxious from all the raw plant matter that after he eventually left that practice, he found out his coworkers had actually gone to the CEO of the business to formally complain about the smell.
Literally complaining to the CEO. It's funny, but it also highlights a really important biological mismatch that people fall into.
Oh, so?
Well, he believed, as many people do when they start a radical cleanse or a raw plant diet, that he was simply detoxing.
Oh, right, that classic narrative. Like, if you feel terrible, it just means the toxins are leaving your body.
Exactly, that's the narrative. He pushed through for months thinking his body was purging years of bad eating. But in reality, his gut flora was completely rejecting the sheer volume of plant matter and raw, indigestible fiber.
Because we aren't built for that.
Right. Humans do not have the digestive tract of a ruminant animal. We don't have a multi-chambered stomach to ferment massive quantities of raw cellulose.
So he wasn't detoxing at all.
Not at all. Instead of detoxing, he was just experiencing an ongoing, violent digestive rebellion. The bacteria in his gut were fermenting all that fiber and producing massive amounts of gas, leading to the bloating, the discomfort, and the issues his coworkers complained about.
So he realizes he's wasting away, and recognizing that humans obviously have some evolutionary history of eating meat, he pivots away from veganism.
Right.
He spends the next 10 to 12 years doing a fairly standard paleo diet. Lots of meat, eggs, nuts, salads, fruit, and things get better. He puts the muscle back on, he feels stronger. But here's the catch in the story. The eczema and the asthma, the things he's been trying to cure since childhood, they do not go away.
No, they don't. And they actually get particularly severe when he enters medical school.
Right.
He was training in jiu-jitsu at the time, which involves a lot of grappling on mats. The eczema patches on his knees and elbows were constantly flaring up, making his skin barrier compromised and raw.
Ouch.
Yeah, and because the skin was open and inflamed, those patches started picking up superficial fungal and bacterial infections from the training mats.
The sources mentioned impetigo, right? Which is like a highly contagious bacterial skin infection.
Yes, exactly. It's painful, it's frustrating, and it's a glaringly clear signal that his immune system is still chronically unhappy.
Even on a clean diet.
Right, even though he's eating what most people in the wellness space would consider a very clean, organic paleo diet.
And this sets the stage for a massive realization he has during his medical training. Let's look at his background because he's not just some guy on the internet.
No, not at all.
He spends 2 years getting his PA master's degree, 4 years working in cardiology, 4 years in medical school, and then 4 years doing a psychiatry residency at the University of Washington.
Right.
He's been deep inside the belly of the beast. And through all of this, he realizes that Western medicine is structurally, fundamentally flawed in how it views the human body.
His diagnosis of the medical system itself is one of the most compelling parts of his story.
Yeah.
He observed that modern medicine insists on dividing illnesses into an absurd number of isolated categories. Currently, the medical coding system has roughly 36,000 different pigeonholes for disease based purely on symptomatic presentation.
Wait, 36,000? That sounds impossible.
It's the reality of the International Classification of Diseases. And Saladino argues that instead of 36,000 different unrelated diseases, we are actually looking at maybe 4 or 5 core root causes.
Okay.
And the absolute primary driver of almost all of them is immune system dysfunction and gut-level neuroinflammation.
Okay, let's unpack this. He's saying that the vast majority of chronic illnesses are just different expressions of the exact same underlying fire.
Precisely. He points out that almost every chronic disease has an autoimmune or inflammatory component. Atherosclerosis, which is heart disease, has autoimmune elements.
Right.
Dementia and Alzheimer's are increasingly being viewed as having autoimmune and inflammatory components. I mean, some even call it type 3 diabetes.
Oh, wow.
And in his specific field of psychiatry, Mental health issues like severe depression, bipolar disorder, and anxiety are fundamentally tied to neuroinflammation.
Neuroinflammation meaning the brain itself is literally inflamed.
Yes, specifically involving changes in the microglial cells.
What are those?
They are the resident macrophages, the immune sentinels in the brain. When the body is systemically inflamed, these cells in the brain become overactive and alter how neurotransmitters are produced and received.
Okay, I think an analogy might help here because 36,000 pigeonholes is just a staggering number to comprehend.
It really is.
It sounds to me like taking your car to a mechanic because the engine is sputtering and making horrible grinding noise. You pull into the shop, and the mechanic looks at your dashboard and just puts a piece of black tape over 36,000 different blinking warning lights.
Mm-hmm.
You get a piece of tape for the spark plug light, a piece of tape for the transmission light, a prescription for the oil pressure light. But nobody ever actually opens the hood to see that there's just a single massive broken serpentine belt whipping around, destroying the entire engine.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. Western medicine treats the blinking lights on the dashboard, and Saladino realized that ground zero for that broken engine belt, the root cause, is almost always the gut.
But why the gut? Like, what is happening down there that affects the brain or the skin?
It comes down to where our immune system actually lives. The vast majority of your immune system is housed in something called the lamina propria.
Okay, break that down for me. What is the lamina propria? I'm picturing a high school biology textbook, but I'm lost.
Sure. Think of your intestinal tract as a long, hollow tube. The inside of that tube is technically the outside of your body. It's where the food you swallow interacts with your internal lining.
Okay, I'm with you.
Just beneath that single layer of cells lining your gut is a thin layer of connective tissue. That is the lamina propria. And it is absolutely packed with lymphatic tissue and immune cells, T cells, B cells, macrophages.
Why are they all stationed down there?
Because that is the border wall. That is where your body encounters foreign material, food, bacteria, viruses, more than anywhere else.
Makes sense.
The foods we eat and the compounds within those foods dictate the behavior of those immune cells. If you eat something your body perceives as a threat, those immune cells become activated. They sound the alarm.
Right.
And here's the critical part. Those activated, angry immune cells don't just stay in the gut. They travel throughout the bloodstream to the rest of the body.
Oh, wow. So the fire starts in the gut, but the smoke damages whatever room it travels to.
Exactly. In one person, based on their unique genetics, that gut-level immune dysfunction travels to the skin and manifests as psoriasis or eczema.
Okay.
In another person, it attacks the joints and is labeled rheumatoid arthritis. In someone else, it attacks the thyroid, and we call it Hashimoto's.
Right.
Or it travels to the brain, causes neuroinflammation, and manifests as severe treatment-resistant depression. It is the same root cause, a compromised, inflamed gut barrier expressing itself 36,000 different ways.
Okay, but if the root of so much psychiatric and physical illness is neuroinflammation stemming from what we put in our digestive tract, I have to ask, why isn't diet the absolute first line of defense?
It's a very fair question.
Especially at a prestigious place like the University of Washington, where he did his psychiatry residency.
It's a great question, and the answer he provides is a damning indictment of medical education. The framework simply does not exist at all. Saladino states there was absolutely zero ability and zero encouragement to treat patients with dietary interventions in his residency. The entire paradigm of psychiatry is built around treating from the neck up, completely divorced from the neck down.
That is wild to me. You have patients coming in with severe mental illness, and nobody asks them what they eat for breakfast.
Never. It's a system entirely reliant on pharmaceutical interventions to tweak neurotransmitters in the brain with little to no regard for the nutritional inputs that are creating the neuroinflammation in the first place.
Unbelievable.
He was seeing patients suffering from debilitating treatment-resistant mental illness, and he knew that giving them another SSRI was just putting another piece of black tape over a blinking dashboard light.
So here he is. He's frustrated with a broken medical system that he's spending a decade of his life training in. He's personally suffering from terrible eczema flare-ups that his paleo diet isn't fixing. And ironically, the thing that finally pushes him over the edge into a radical life-altering diet change is actually health food.
Right. This is where the story takes a fascinating turn. At the time, he was heavily into medicinal mushroom extracts.
Oh, yeah.
Things like cordyceps, reishi, chaga, lion's mane. These are widely marketed as ultimate superfoods for immunity and brain health.
Right, you see them in every high-end coffee shop now, like mushroom coffees everywhere.
Exactly. He was taking high doses of them, and
Mm.
instead of feeling supercharged, it triggered a massive head-to-toe eczema flare.
Oh, man.
His immune system was absolutely screaming at him. The very things he thought were the peak of natural health were causing his body to attack itself.
Yeah.
He is primed for a change. And it happens on a cold, rainy drive to go surfing in Seattle.
I love this detail from the sources because it's such a normal, everyday moment that changes a life. He's driving to the beach, he throws on a podcast, and he hears the clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson talking about a bizarre health journey. Peterson explained on this podcast that he and his daughter, Michaela, had suffered from debilitating, lifelong autoimmune conditions. Severe depression, joint degradation conditions that top-tier rheumatologists and doctors told them were entirely incurable and would require lifelong medication.
And Peterson claimed on this podcast that he and his daughter fixed these conditions almost entirely by adopting a strict meat, salt, and water diet.
Just meat.
Just meat. They eliminated every single plant from their diet. No vegetables, no fruit, no grains, no seeds.
Now, for a medically trained doctor, that has to sound insane, right? I mean, we're told that fiber is essential, that antioxidants in plants are the only way to fight aging.
Absolutely.
But Saladino, being the scientist he is, decides to treat himself as an N-of-1 experiment. He figures, what does he have to lose? His skin is already on fire, so he cuts out all plants. He transitions to a 100% carnivore diet consisting only of meat, organs, salt, and animal fat.
And the immediate result defies everything he was taught in medical school. It works. His lifelong eczema, the condition he suffered from since he was a small child, completely heals.
Just vanishes.
Vanishes. He never gets a recurrence. His asthma clears up. His joint pain disappears. His mental clarity skyrockets.
That's incredible.
It is. He is so profoundly impacted by this that he dives deep into the biochemistry of meat and plant toxicity. He writes a wildly successful book. He becomes the famous carnivore MD.
Right.
He builds this massive following of hundreds of thousands of people based on the healing power of an animal-only diet. He is witnessing a collective movement of people healing conditions that mainstream medicine deemed impossible to fix simply by cutting out leaves and stems.
Yeah. But, you know, there is always a but in these stories. For a year and a half, he thrives. He's the poster boy for zero-carb living. But then, a major complication arises.
Yeah, it does.
After roughly 18 months of strict zero-carbohydrate carnivore eating, he hits a massive physiological wall.
And it wasn't just a minor speed bump. Long-term, strict ketosis began taking a severe toll on his body.
Let's define that real quick for everyone. Ketosis is when your body has no carbohydrates to burn for energy, so it switches to burning fat, producing ketones, right?
That's right. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism designed to keep us alive during periods of famine or winter when plant foods aren't available.
Okay.
But Saladino was staying in this starvation-mimicking state permanently, and the symptoms started piling up.
What kind of symptoms?
He experienced relentless, painful muscle cramps, especially at night. He developed heart palpitations. His sleep architecture completely fragmented. He just couldn't stay asleep.
And the really alarming one for a guy in his prime, his hormones crashed. The sources state his total testosterone dropped from a very healthy 800 down to around 500.
Yeah.
He was basically living in a perpetual state of what the internet calls the keto flu.
Exactly.
Now, I have to push back here on behalf of the listener because we hear about the keto flu all the time. But usually that's just what happens when people first cut carbs, and it passes in a week or two once your body adapts. Why is a healthy guy eating huge amounts of nutrient-dense meat getting long-term keto flu after a year and a half?
Well, this brings us to a crucial piece of human physiology that Saladino says he was simply never taught in his 4 years of medical school.
Wow.
It is about the hidden secondary role of a hormone we all think we understand, insulin.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because usually insulin is just talked about as the blood sugar hormone.
Right. We always think of insulin strictly in terms of blood sugar management. You eat a donut, your blood sugar spikes. Insulin is released by the pancreas to shuttle that toxic excess sugar out of the blood and into the cells.
Yeah, that's the standard story.
But insulin has a second, equally critical job. It acts as a vital signaling hormone for the kidneys.
How so? Like, what is it telling the kidneys to do?
When you eat carbohydrates, even healthy ones, your body releases a pulse of insulin. That insulin travels through the bloodstream to the kidneys and essentially gives them a command. It says, hold on to electrolytes. Specifically, it tells the kidneys to reabsorb sodium rather than excreting it into the urine.
Okay, so if you are on a strict zero-carb carnivore diet, you never eat carbs. Therefore, you almost never get that meaningful insulin spike.
Exactly. Without that insulin signal, the kidneys lack the instruction to retain sodium, so they actively waste it.
They just dump it.
They just flush sodium out in the urine constantly. And here is where human physiology gets incredibly interconnected. Our cells rely on complex systems called antiporters and symporters to manage minerals.
Whoa, back up. What is a symporter and an antiporter? Explain that to me like I'm in high school biology and I just failed the midterm.
Fair enough. Think of a cell membrane as a highly secure border crossing. Minerals can't just walk across, they need a vehicle.
Okay.
A symporter is a vehicle that takes two different minerals and drives them across the border together in the same direction. An antiporter is like a revolving door. As one mineral goes out, another specific mineral is allowed in.
Okay, so they are linked. You can't move one without moving the other?
Exactly. And sodium is the primary currency for these doors. Because the kidneys are constantly flushing sodium out of the body due to the lack of insulin, the body desperately tries to balance the cellular charge.
So what happens?
Because sodium is flowing out, it literally drags all the other essential electrolytes, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, out with it through those symporters and antiporters.
So to put it in everyday terms, a kidney without an insulin signal isn't just a filter. It's basically a dam where the manager has gone on strike.
That's a good way to look at it.
Usually the manager gets a radio signal that's the insulin telling him to close the floodgates and keep the water level high. But on a zero-carb diet, the radio is silent. So the gates just stay wide open. It doesn't matter how much salt you sprinkle on your ribeye or how much magnesium-infused water you drink. You are constantly pouring electrolytes into a reservoir with open floodgates. They just drain straight out down the river.
That is a brilliant analogy, and that constant draining is exactly why he was cramping and experiencing heart palpitations.
Because the heart needs those electrolytes.
Yeah. Right. The heart relies on precise gradients of sodium, potassium, and calcium to generate the electrical action potentials that make it beat. Without them, the rhythm gets erratic.
Oh, man.
Furthermore, his body was literally incapable of holding on to the minerals required for basic cellular function, which includes hormone synthesis, hence the drop in testosterone.
But hold on a second. This completely flies in the face of modern diet culture.
It really does.
We are constantly told by fitness influencers, by diet gurus, by everyone selling a program that insulin is the ultimate villain. It's the fat storage hormone, the boogeyman of weight gain.
Right.
The prevailing logic is that you want your insulin as close to zero as possible at all times to stay lean and healthy.
Are you saying insulin is actually a vital signaling mechanism that we fundamentally need to function?
According to this deep dive into Saladino's evolving views, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The demonization of insulin is a massive, dangerous oversimplification.
So why does it have such a bad reputation? Because context matters. Chronically elevated insulin, which happens when you sit on the couch and eat ultra-processed garbage, drinking big gulps of high-fructose corn syrup all day, is absolutely detrimental.
Yeah, obviously.
Your cells become deaf to the constant shouting of insulin, leading to insulin resistance, obesity, and type 2 diabetes. But the natural, acute, temporary pulses of insulin that come from consuming whole food carbohydrates.
Those are good.
Those are a necessary physiological trigger. Without those pulses, your electrolyte balance collapses, your sleep architecture fragments, your stress hormones rise to compensate, and your sex hormones plummet.
Okay, so Saladino figures this out. And he is facing a total crisis of faith. I mean, think about the ego death required here.
It's massive.
He wrote the literal book on the carnivore diet. He built his entire brand on it. And now his own body is failing him because of the very rules he preaches. It requires incredible humility to step back in front of hundreds of thousands of followers and say, okay, I found a piece of the truth. Eliminating toxic plants is incredibly healing for autoimmune issues, but I clearly do not have the whole truth.
It's rare to see that level of public pivot. He realizes he has to look back at the plant kingdom.
Right.
He knows he needs carbohydrates to generate that insulin signal, but he also knows that if he eats the wrong plants, his horrific eczema will return instantly.
So how does he decide what's safe? Does he just start throwing darts at a vegetable aisle?
No, he turns to evolutionary plant biology to guide his choices. He decides to introduce what he calls clean carbohydrates,
Which are gross.
specifically fruit, honey, and maple syrup. And the logic behind this is deeply grounded in how plants have evolved to survive over hundreds of millions of years.
I find this part fascinating because we tend to view plants as these benign, passive things, just waiting for us to eat them for our health.
Exactly, like they're just volunteers.
Right. But plants are engaged in a brutal war for survival. They can't run away. If an animal wants to eat them, they don't have claws, they don't have teeth, they can't hide in a cave, so they have to use chemical warfare.
That is exactly the evolutionary perspective. Plants produce defense chemicals to protect the parts of themselves that are vital for survival and reproduction.
What kind of chemicals are we talking about?
Things like oxalates, lectins, and phytic acid. Take oxalates, for example.
Okay.
These are tiny, sharp crystals found in high concentrations in things like spinach and almonds. When humans consume too many oxalates, they can bind to calcium in the blood and form kidney stones, or lodge in joint tissue and cause severe inflammatory pain.
Yikes.
And lectins are proteins that can bind to the lining of the human gut, disrupting the tight junctions and contributing to leaky gut syndrome.
And the plant puts these chemicals in specific places, right?
Yes. They heavily defend their roots, their stems, their leaves, and critically, their seeds. And we need to remember that nuts, grains, and beans, which make up the bulk of the modern plant-based diet, are all biologically classified as seeds.
Oh, right.
These parts of the plant are loaded with defense chemicals because the plant absolutely does not want you to eat them. If you eat a plant's seeds and digest them, you have ended that plant's genetic lineage.
I think of the plant like a high-security compound. The leaves and the stems, that's the locked vault.
Right.
It is surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards. If you try to break in, you're going to get hurt, or in human terms, you're going to get an inflammation, joint pain, or an eczema flare-up from the defense chemicals.
That's a good visualization for the vegetative parts of the plant.
But the fruit is completely different. The fruit is a welcome mat with a massive gift basket sitting on the front porch. The plant has specifically designed the fruit to invite you in.
Exactly. The plant wants animals to eat its fruit. That is the entire biological purpose of fruit. It is how the plant spreads its seeds to new territories.
Okay, I see.
An animal eats the sweet fruit, swallows the hard seeds within it whole, wanders off a few miles, and deposits the seeds somewhere else in a pile of ready-made natural fertilizer.
It's a symbiotic trade.
Precisely. Therefore, to attract animals, fruit is brightly colored so it stands out against the green leaves. It is packed with sweet carbohydrates for energy. And remarkably, the concentration of defense chemicals actually declines significantly as the fruit ripens.
Really?
Yes, an unripe green banana is highly defended and will give you a stomachache. A ripe, yellow, sweet banana has lowered its defenses entirely to offer you a nutritional trade.
And this isn't just theoretical biology he read in a textbook. Saladino actually traveled to Tanzania to visit the Hadza people, right?
Yeah.
They are one of the last remaining true hunter-gatherer tribes on Earth.
Yes, he wanted to see what humans actually eat in a state of nature, completely uninfluenced by modern dietary guidelines, USDA food pyramids, or grocery stores.
And if you ask the Hadza what their absolute favorite foods are, the hierarchy is incredibly clear, and it completely contradicts what we are told to eat.
It really does.
Number one, above all else, is meat. Specifically, the fatty meat of animals they hunt. Number two is organs. Number three is berries, local baobab fruit, and wild honey.
What is notably absent from the top of that list is what modern dietitians tell us to fill half our plates with vegetables and seeds.
Yeah.
The Hadza do eat some tubers, which they have to roast extensively over a fire to neutralize the toxins, but leaves, stems, and seeds are universally considered starvation fallback foods.
Meaning they only eat a salad if they're literally going to starve to death otherwise.
Exactly. They only eat them when they are absolutely desperate and the hunting is poor. This completely flips the conventional modern food pyramid.
Because the pyramid places massive quantities of vegetables and grains at the foundational base and treats meat as an optional, somewhat dangerous luxury.
Right.
Okay, but tracking with the evolutionary logic. But this raises a massive red flag for a lot of people listening.
What's that?
Because if Saladina is suddenly eating huge amounts of fruit and drinking raw honey and maple syrup every day to get his insulin up, aren't we just talking about massive amounts of sugar?
How
does he differentiate between eating a giant bowl of mangoes covered in honey and drinking a 32-ounce soda sweetened with high fructose corn syrup?
Isn't sugar just sugar at the end of the day?
It is a critical question, and it's a distinction Saladino is very careful to make. It comes down to the concept of biological information packaged with the sugar.
What do you mean by biological information?
Natural honey and whole fruit are incredibly complex biological structures. Honey alone contains over 600 identified components and likely hundreds more that haven't even been categorized by science yet. A single piece of whole fruit contains over 5,000 distinct biological compounds.
Thousands. So it's not just a standalone sugar molecule floating in water.
Far from it. When you eat natural fruit or raw honey, you are getting the sugar, yes, but you are also getting polyphenols, antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, and crucial prebiotics.
Right. These compounds actually communicate with your gut microbiome. They actively prevent bad pathogenic bacteria from overgrowing when the sugar enters your digestive system. You are getting the metabolic fuel, but it's bundled with the exact software required to process it safely.
Okay, compare that to high fructose corn syrup, or HFCS, which is in basically every packaged food in the center aisles of the grocery store.
HFCS is not a food. It is an industrial chemical.
Wow.
You start with corn, which is pure glucose. Then, in a massive factory, they extract the starch, use synthetic enzymes to isomerize it, meaning they forcefully rearrange the molecular structure to turn that glucose into fructose, because fructose is sweeter and cheaper.
So it's completely unnatural.
Entirely. It is completely stripped of all those evolutionary regulatory compounds. There are no polyphenols, there is no fiber, it has zero biological information.
It gets worse, right?
Oh, yeah. Shockingly, studies have shown that HFCS often contains trace amounts of mercury and other toxic heavy metals left over from the intense manufacturing process.
Mercury in our food, that's insane. And how does the body react to that compared to an apple?
When you consume isolated processed sucrose, or HFCS, there is nothing to regulate the gut. The sugar acts like an unrestrained fertilizer for the bacteria in your digestive tract.
Okay.
It causes massive, rapid bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine. This overgrowth leads to an increase in something called lipopolysaccharides, or endotoxins.
Endotoxins.
Right. These endotoxins are produced by the bacteria, and they leak through the gut lining into your bloodstream, a state called endotoxemia, which creates rampant systemic inflammation throughout your entire body. You would never encounter pure, isolated fructose in nature.
So the problem isn't the sweet part of the fruit. The problem is humans playing God, taking the sweet part, stripping away the 5,000 other evolutionary compounds that tell the body how to handle it, modifying it in a lab, and then chugging it in a plastic bottle. That makes sense. But if I can play devil's advocate for a second. If his new evolved diet consists of huge amounts of fatty red meat, organs, eggs, plus copious amounts of fruit and raw honey, isn't his doctor going to absolutely freak out about his cholesterol?
Oh, completely.
Doesn't this diet break every single rule of modern cardiology?
It absolutely breaks the rules of modern cardiology, and this brings us directly into the most controversial, heavily debated aspect of the source material.
The cholesterol debate.
Yes, the role of cholesterol, and specifically a particle called apolipoprotein B, or ApoB.
Okay, let's dive deep into the cholesterol controversy, because this is the stuff that gets people into screaming matches at dinner parties and gets doctors' licenses threatened. What actually happens to your blood panels when you eat an animal-based diet like this?
When you eat an evolutionarily consistent diet that is high in saturated animal fats, foods like beef tallow, ghee, egg yolks, and fatty steak, your LDL cholesterol and your ApoB levels will almost inevitably rise.
And let's clarify what ApoB is, because it's becoming the new buzzword in longevity medicine. Apo stands for apolipoprotein. It's basically the protein wrapped around a particle that carries cholesterol and fat through the blood, right?
Exactly. Think of cholesterol as cargo and ApoB as the boat carrying that cargo through the rivers of your bloodstream.
And in a normal doctor's office, if your ApoB boats are too high, alarm bells start ringing and someone writes you a prescription for a statin drug immediately.
Precisely. And that knee-jerk reaction is based on the foundational dogma of modern cardiology, which is called the response to retention hypothesis.
Which means what?
This hypothesis claims that there is a direct, geometric, unavoidable causal relationship between the sheer number of ApoB particles in your blood and the progression of atherosclerosis, which is the dangerous buildup of plaque in your arteries.
So if the conventional wisdom is simply more ApoB boats in the river equals more artery plaque. End of story. Case closed.
That is what is taught in medical school. But Saladino argues that this model is fundamentally fatally flawed. Yes, He points out massive glaring discordances in that theory, real-world population-level examples that just completely break the ApoB is a direct killer rule.
Yeah, the sources bring up some wild counterexamples. First, he looks at centenarians, people who live to be over 100 years old.
Right. If you look at mortality data and blood panels of centenarians, they almost universally have elevated LDL cholesterol, usually over 99 nanograms per deciliter. Some are much higher.
Okay, so if the theory was true,
If high ApoB was a direct guaranteed trigger for fatal heart disease, it would be biologically impossible for these people to be living to 100 with those lipid panels.
he also mentioned Singapore, which I found fascinating because we never hear about this in the mainstream longevity discussions.
Singapore is an incredible case study. They have one of the highest average life expectancies on the entire planet, but the average person in Singapore eats roughly 1.5 pounds of meat per day. It is a hugely animal protein and animal fat dense culture.
A pound and a half a day. And yet this fact is conveniently completely ignored by all the blue zone advocates who try to claim that longevity strictly requires a plant-based, low-fat diet.
It is a massive statistical anomaly if you follow conventional dietary dogma. You cannot explain Singapore or centenarians using the response to retention hypothesis.
So how does Saladino explain this?
He synthesizes it by arguing a very specific nuance. ApoB is necessary for plaque formation, yes, but it is not sufficient on its own to cause heart disease.
Meaning it's part of the process, but it can't start the fire by itself.
Exactly. For atherosclerosis to begin, you must have a damaged endothelium. The endothelium is the delicate single-cell inner lining of your blood vessels.
Okay, let's slow down here. I want to make sure I understand the mechanics.
Imagine the inside of your blood vessel is like a perfectly smooth Teflon tube. If the endothelium is healthy, intact, and smooth, high levels of ApoB just float on by.
They don't stick.
They don't stick. They do their job delivering fat-soluble vitamins, cholesterol, and building materials to cells that need them, and they do not cause plaque. They can't stick.
But if the endothelium is damaged,
Right. If it's damaged, denuded, inflamed, or sticky, then the ApoB particles get caught in the cracks. They become oxidized, macrophages rush in to clean up the mess, and that entire inflammatory cluster becomes what we call artery plaque.
okay, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. If the ApoB is like an ambulance driving down the highway, you're saying modern cardiology looks at a terrible car crash, sees the ambulance parked right there in the wreckage, and concludes, my God, every time there's a terrible accident, there is an ambulance present. Ambulances must be causing the crashes. We need to ban ambulances.
That is a brilliant way to frame it.
And Saladino's arguing, no, the ambulance is just there trying to patch up the road, the endothelium that was destroyed by something else entirely. Arresting the paramedics instead of looking for the drunk driver who caused the crash in the first place is terrible medicine. Blaming the ApoB ignores whatever caused the damage to the blood vessel wall.
That analogy holds up perfectly, especially when you look at Saladino's vein versus artery argument, which is one of his most compelling physiological points.
I was blown away by this when reading the source material. Walk us through it.
It's incredibly simple but profoundly damning to the mainstream narrative. The blood that flows through your veins is the exact same blood that flows through your arteries. It has the exact same concentration of ApoB, the exact same LDL, the exact same cholesterol.
Obviously.
But humans do not get atherosclerosis in their veins. We only get it in our arteries. You never hear of someone having a venous bypass because of plaque buildup.
Why is that?
Because arteries are a high-pressure system, the blood is being pumped forcefully from the heart, hitting bifurcations and forks in the vessels. It is a system prone to shear stress and endothelial denuding, meaning damage to the lining.
And veins.
Veins are a low-pressure return system. So if ApoB alone was the direct causal trigger for plaque, if the mere presence of cholesterol caused it to aggressively dig into the vessel walls, as we are taught, we would see plaque everywhere the blood goes, including the veins.
But we don't.
We don't. We only see it where there is a high likelihood of pressure damage to the vessel wall.
I have to stop you there. Because if that is true, it changes everything.
It really does.
If ApoB isn't the primary trigger pulling the gun, what is? What is the drunk driver crashing on the highway? What is causing this rampant, massive endothelial damage that is allowing the plaque to form?
Yeah.
Because earlier, the sources mentioned a terrifying statistic.
Yeah.
88% to 93% of Americans are metabolically unwell. They have some form of insulin resistance. What is destroying the blood vessels of almost the entire country?
The damage to the endothelium isn't random. According to the sources, it comes from rampant oxidation and cellular-level insulin resistance. And Saladino points the finger directly at a modern industrial addition to our diet's seed oils.
Ah, the true villains of this story. And this is a huge paradigm shift. Let's really break down what seed oils are, because the marketing is so insidious. Seed oil sounds like something you'd buy at a quaint farmer's market.
Right.
But we're talking about canola, soybean, corn, sunflower, and safflower oil. The clear yellow oils in plastic jugs.
The core issue with these oils is their massive concentration of polyunsaturated fats, specifically a molecule called linoleic acid. To understand why they are so biologically destructive, you have to look at how they are made and their molecular structure.
They are natural, right?
No, they are not natural foods. They are industrial byproducts.
Yeah, the creation process of canola oil is frankly horrifying once you read into it. Canola doesn't even come from a plant called canola. Canola is an acronym. It stands for Canadian oil, low acid. It is derived from genetically modified rapeseeds.
Right. Natural rapeseed oil has high levels of erucic acid, which is toxic and strongly associated with heart lesions in animal models, so they had to modify the plant. But even the modified version requires industrial-grade chemistry to extract.
Let's walk through that process, because people use this to cook their kids' eggs every morning. How do they get oil out of a tiny, hard seed?
It requires extreme mechanical and chemical intervention. First, the seeds are subjected to high heat and pressure, but that only gets a fraction of the oil out.
So what's next?
So they take the remaining seed mash and wash it in a toxic petroleum-derived chemical solvent called hexane to extract the rest of the fat.
Hexene, like what they put in gasoline.
Yes. Then they boil off the hexane. But at this point, the oil is a dark, sludgy, foul-smelling liquid because the fragile polyunsaturated fats have already been heavily oxidized and degraded by the heat and the solvent.
That sounds disgusting.
It is. So they have to degum it. Then, because it literally smells rancid, they have to deodorize it by blasting it with sodium hydroxide at incredibly high temperatures.
So they were essentially chemically bleaching and perfuming rotten oil so we don't gag when we open the bottle.
Exactly. This intense heat and chemical processing completely oxidizes the fragile double bonds in the polyunsaturated fats before they even go into the bottle. By the time it reaches the grocery store shelf, the oil is often already rancid, loaded with free radicals.
Okay, let's pause. What exactly is a free radical, and why is an oxidized fat bad? Explain the mechanics of that.
Think of a fat molecule, like a chain of carbon atoms holding hands. Saturated fats like butter or tallow have all their hands full holding on to hydrogen. They are stable, you can heat them, leave them out, they don't break.
Okay.
Polyunsaturated fats like seed oils have empty hands. The chain has weak points called double bonds. When exposed to heat, light, or chemicals, those weak points snap. The molecule breaks apart and creates free radicals.
And a free radical is?
A free radical is essentially a molecular buzzsaw. Is a highly unstable molecule that bounces around inside your cells, ripping electrons off of other structures, damaging your DNA, and critically, tearing microscopic holes in the endothelium of your blood vessels.
Tearing holes in the endothelium, which creates the exact damage where the APOB ambulance gets stuck and forms plaque.
Exactly.
And yet, we are eating astronomical quantities of this stuff. The average American consumes 5 to 6 tablespoons of seed oils every single day. They're in absolutely everything. Salad dressings, oat milk, baked goods, restaurant fryers, supposedly healthy granola bars. The sources note that to get that equivalent amount of linoleic acid historically from natural whole foods, you'd have to sit down and eat 65 to 75 entire ears of corn. Or you'd have to crack open and eat over 2.5 pounds of sunflower seeds every single day. It's biologically impossible.
And that biological impossibility leads to what the expert in the source calls cumulative toxicity. This is a crucial concept.
I thought about it.
You see, ruminant animals like cows or sheep have specialized multi-chambered digestive systems with bacteria that can actually convert fragile polyunsaturated fats into stable saturated fats before they absorb them.
But humans don't have that.
No, monogastric animals like pigs, chickens, and humans cannot saturate these fats. When we consume massive amounts of linoleic acid from seed oils, our bodies can't just burn it off immediately. It literally accumulates.
Where does it go?
The linoleic acid physically incorporates into our cellular membranes and our adipose, or fat tissue. Over the last 50 years, the amount of linoleic acid stored in human body fat has increased by over 130%.
So we are essentially building our bodies out of rancid, unstable material. Going back to analogies, it's like deciding to run your modern car engine on cheap, submarine lubricant.
Oh, that's a great one.
Sure, it's a liquid. It might technically flow through the system for a little while, but the high heat and pressure of the engine are going to rapidly break it down, turn it into sludge, and absolutely destroy the delicate machinery from the inside out.
That is a very accurate representation of what happens at a microscopic level. Saladino explains that the accumulation of linoleic acid in human cell membranes profoundly disrupts the mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell.
How does it do that? Break down the cellular mechanics for me.
Inside the mitochondria, there is a process called the electron transport chain. It's basically a microscopic water wheel that pumps protons across a membrane to generate ATP, which is cellular energy.
Okay, I follow.
The membrane holding those protons in is made of a specific fat called cardiolipin. When you eat too much seed oil, your body replaces the stable fats in the cardiolipin with fragile linoleic acid.
And what happens to the membrane?
It becomes flimsy. The proton gradient becomes leaky. The protons slip back through the membrane without turning the water wheel. Your cells fail to produce energy efficiently.
Which means the cell freaks out.
Right. The cell senses this energy failure, panics, and sends signals to force more energy inside. This metabolic chaos, driven by mitochondrial failure, is what fundamentally causes cellular insulin resistance. The cell shuts down the insulin receptors to protect itself from taking in more fuel it can't process.
That is terrifying. But wait, I have to challenge this based on what mainstream science says. If these oils are so universally bad, shouldn't blood tests clearly show that?
You would think so.
I feel like I've read studies from mainstream nutritionists claiming that people with lower linoleic acid in their blood actually have worse health outcomes. How does Saladino square that circle?
That is what Saladino brilliantly calls the trap of blood tests. You cannot accurately measure cumulative linoleic acid toxicity through a standard blood draw. Plasma or blood turns over constantly. It is just a highway, not a storage facility.
Okay, so looking at the blood doesn't show you what's in the tissue.
Right, but it goes deeper. The problem is how linoleic acid is metabolized. In the human body, it is broken down by two specific enzymes, delta-6 desaturase and delta-5 desaturase. These enzymes convert the linoleic acid into highly inflammatory downstream mediators, like arachidonic acid.
Wait, let me make sure I follow.
The people who have the lowest levels of linoleic acid circulating in their blood are often actually doing the worst. Why? Because their bodies are hypermetabolizing it.
Oh.
Their delta-6 and delta-5 enzymes are rapidly and aggressively converting all of that circulating linoleic acid into massive amounts of systemic inflammation.
Oh, wow. So the blood test is completely misleading. It's showing the absence of the poison only because the poison has already been converted into a blazing fire.
Exactly. To get an accurate reading of how toxic you are, you would actually need to do an adipose tissue biopsy, literally stick a needle in, extract fat from your body, and test how much linoleic acid has accumulated there over years.
And it's not just the classic cooking oils either. The source material flags a lot of health foods that are secretly linoleic acid bombs. Nut butters, for example. We think of peanut butter and almond butter as health foods.
Yes. Peanuts and almonds naturally contain linoleic acid, but when you grind them up into a paste, expose them to oxygen, and leave them sitting on a grocery store shelf for 6 months, the oil separates and sits on top.
Oh yeah, the gross oily layer.
Right. That layer of oil becomes highly oxidized and rancid. Furthermore, conventional peanut butter is often made from moldy peanuts and contains high levels of aflatoxin, which is a potent mycotoxin.
That's awful.
Even things touted as absolute superfoods like flaxseed oil are highly fragile, highly oxidized sources of concentrated linoleic acid. They go rancid almost the moment they are pressed.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate again.
Yeah.
Because if the biochemistry of oxidation is so clear and the cumulative toxicity is so damaging to our mitochondria, why does the American Heart Association actively recommend canola oil?
Yeah, the AHA.
They literally slap a shiny heart-healthy checkmark on the bottle because they say it lowers your cholesterol. How did our entire medical institution filled with brilliant scientists get this so entirely, completely wrong? I mean, are you telling me top cardiologists intentionally gave advice that killed people?
To understand that, we have to look back at the history of our dietary guidelines. It's not necessarily a malicious conspiracy to kill people. It is a story of how massive financial conflicts of interest shaped institutional momentum, which then became unquestionable dogma.
So walk me through the history. How did we get here?
If we rewind about 120 years, Americans cooked almost exclusively with animal fats, tallow, lard, butter. Seed oils simply did not exist in the human diet. and cardiovascular disease was incredibly rare. It was merely a tiny fraction of what it is today.
Really?
Yes, the explosion of heart disease is a modern 20th century phenomenon.
So what changed? Why did we abandon butter?
In the 1950s, a researcher named Ansel Keys popularized the fear of saturated fat with his 7-country study, claiming that animal fat caused heart attacks. His data was highly cherry-picked, but it gained traction.
Okay.
However, the true turning point involved money. Around the same time, the American Heart Association was a relatively small, struggling professional organization. They didn't have much influence. Then they received a massive donation from Procter & Gamble.
Procter & Gamble,
Yeah.
the soap and chemical company.
Yes. And importantly, Procter & Gamble were the manufacturers of Crisco.
Crisco,
Yeah.
which is artificial hydrogenated vegetable oil. It's crystallized cottonseed oil.
Exactly. The donation to the AHA was $1.7 million. Adjusted for inflation, that is the equivalent of about $20 million today.
$20 million to a struggling health organization from a company selling industrial vegetable oil. That is a massive, blinding conflict of interest.
Immediately following that influx of cash, the AHA pivoted their recommendations. They began actively telling American housewives to replace natural butter and lard with industrial seed oils and margarine.
Wow.
There were literal advertisements in magazines from the 1960s telling mothers to polyunsaturaate your family with corn oil to prevent heart disease.
Polyunsaturaate your family.
Yeah.
It literally sounds like a chemical threat.
Yep.
And what about the actual clinical trials? Did nobody in the scientific community bother to test if this massive dietary experiment, swapping evolutionary fats for factory lubricants, was actually safe?
They did test it, and the results were devastating. The most famous example cited in the sources is the Minnesota coronary experiment.
What was that?
It was a massive, highly controlled, long-term clinical trial conducted in the late 60s and early 70s. Researchers took over 9,000 patients in state mental hospitals and nursing homes, meaning their diets were completely controlled by the staff.
Okay, a real controlled study.
Yes. They took one group and fed them a diet rich in saturated animal fat. They took the other group and replaced the saturated fat with polyunsaturated vegetable oils, exactly as the AHA was recommending.
And what happened?
The group consuming the vegetable oils did indeed see a drop in their total cholesterol, which is what the researchers wanted. But crucially, that same group had a significantly increased rate of cardiovascular death and a higher rate of total mortality.
Oh my God.
The seed oils lowered cholesterol but killed the patients faster.
But nobody heard about it. I've never heard of this study until this deep dive. Why wasn't this front page news?
Because Ansel Keys, the architect of the saturated fat hypothesis, was deeply involved in the study. The results completely contradicted his life's work, his ego, and the prevailing narrative.
So they just hid it.
Yes. The raw data was buried. It was literally left in boxes in a basement for decades. It wasn't until 2016 that researchers finally unearthed the raw data, reanalyzed it, and published the truth in the British Medical Journal long after the damage to public health was already done.
It is enraging. And the really depressing part of the source material is that it makes it clear this isn't just ancient history. These conflicts of interest are still completely rampant today, right now.
Very much so. Take the USDA Dietary Guidelines Committee, the group of supposed experts who dictate what goes into public school lunches, military rations, and shape massive federal food policy.
Okay.
The sources note that an astonishing 95% of the individuals on that committee have documented financial conflicts of interest with pharmaceutical companies or ultra-processed food conglomerates.
Give me an example, because that sounds insane.
The specific example cited is a researcher named Darius Mozaffarian from Tufts University. He is heavily involved in drafting the upcoming 2025 to 2030 USDA guidelines.
Okay.
This is the same researcher who authored a widely criticized food compass rating system. This system was designed to rank foods from 1 to 100 based on healthiness. It bizarrely ranked ultra-processed, sugar-laden cereals like Frosted Mini Wheats higher than whole, single-ingredient foods like ground beef and eggs.
Frosted Mini Wheats over beef and eggs. That is not science. That is corporate propaganda masquerading as science.
And he has also authored massive meta-analyses claiming seed oils are completely benign and heart-healthy, while allegedly receiving funding from major agricultural and seed oil conglomerates like Bunge.
It just feels like we are living in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
So how do we fix this? Why don't the good, honest frontline doctors just read the new science, look at the biochemistry of oxidation, and update their recommendations to their patients?
because of human nature and tribalism. The source material introduces a brilliant sociological concept to explain this called Brandolini's Law.
What's that?
It's also known as the bullshit asymmetry principle. It states that the amount of energy required to refute false information is an order of magnitude larger than the energy required to produce it in the first place.
Interesting.
Specifically, researchers estimate it takes about 10.2 times more effort to unbrainwash someone than it does to brainwash them initially.
Right. It's so easy to say cholesterol clogs arteries like fat in a pipe. That takes 2 seconds. It takes an hour-long deep dive to explain the nuance of apoB, endothelial damage, and mitochondrial leakage.
Exactly. So imagine you have a young, bright-eyed medical student. They go to school, they memorize the textbooks that say saturated fat is evil and seed oils are heart healthy. They pass their boards.
Yeah.
And then they spend the next 30 years of their career prescribing statins, telling thousands of trusting patients to avoid red meat and telling them to cook in corn oil.
Right.
To suddenly turn around, look at the new data, and admit, I was fundamentally wrong and I've been giving harmful advice for my entire career, that is psychologically devastating.
Yeah.
Most human egos cannot survive that.
It's tribalism. You don't want to break rank with your fellow doctors and admit the entire profession got it wrong?
Precisely. Medical students are famously told on their first day of school, half of what we teach you here is wrong, we just don't know which half. Yet, when a physician like Saladino actually steps out of line, looks at the biochemistry, and questions the dogma, they are fiercely ostracized.
They call him a quack.
Exactly. They are labeled a quack by the medical establishment. It is an aircraft carrier of institutional momentum funded by billions of dollars, and it takes decades to turn it around.
So bringing this all back down to earth, what does this mean for you, the listener? Because this is heavy, paradigm-shattering stuff. We've basically just dismantled the entire center aisles of the grocery store.
We have.
But we can't all move to an oceanfront farm in Australia to raise our own grass-fed cows. We can't all fly to Tanzania to forage for wild berries and honey with the Hadza tribe. We live in the modern world. How does a regular person apply this information without losing their mind, alienating their family, or going broke?
The key takeaway from the sources is a concept called progression versus perfection. You cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
That's reassuring.
You do not have to switch to a strict, raw meat carnivore diet overnight. You don't have to stress about the microscopic linoleic acid content of a single almond you ate at a party. The goal is simply about reducing the massive, unnatural loads of cumulative toxicity in your daily routine.
I love the idea they present of lateral shifts. This is so actionable. You look in your pantry and you just make a lateral move to something slightly less toxic. You don't even have to change your flavor profile. You just upgrade the ingredients.
Exactly. Give some examples of how a listener might do that.
Okay, take breakfast. Instead of that plastic cup of low-fat, high-fructose corn syrup yogurt that uses red dye 40 to simulate fruit, you shift laterally. You grab a bowl of full-fat, whole milk Greek yogurt, drop in a handful of real organic berries, and drizzle it with natural raw honey.
That sounds great.
It tastes infinitely better, the saturated fat keeps you full longer, and it comes bundled with all that evolutionary biological information, the polyphenols and prebiotics that we talked about.
That is a perfect lateral shift. Or consider snacks for yourself or your kids. Instead of buying a highly processed, chemical-laden meat stick from a gas station that is loaded with seed oils and preservatives, look for an air-dried, grass-fed beef stick.
Saladino makes those, right?
Yes. Saladino actually helped formulate snacks that are air-dried at low temperatures around 78 degrees for 5 days, so they don't require the synthetic lactic acid, sodium nitrates, or hidden celery powder that cooked jerkies rely on to stay shelf-stable.
What about organ meats? Because the Hadza prize them, Saladino preaches about them, but let's be real, most people are incredibly intimidated by eating liver or heart.
They are nutrient powerhouses containing incredibly bioavailable forms of B vitamins, copper, and iron. But if you can't stomach the taste, you make a lateral shift.
How so?
You can simply buy high-quality, desiccated, grass-fed organ capsules. You can swallow them like a vitamin, or open a capsule and blend the powder invisibly into your kid's morning smoothie, or mix it into ground beef for tacos.
That's a great hack.
They won't even taste it, but they get the biological benefits. Small, manageable, everyday shifts.
So to bring this massive deep dive together, we have covered an astonishing amount of ground today.
We truly have. We started by exploring the fundamental biological mismatch of the modern standard diet, highlighted by Dr. Saladino's intense personal journey from a sickly child heavily reliant on asthma medications to an overprescribed, disillusioned medical resident.
Right.
We examine the profound evolutionary logic of treating fruit as a plant's biochemical invitation while learning to respect the heavy chemical defenses of seeds, leaves, and stems.
We unpacked the deep misunderstandings surrounding insulin, learning that it isn't just a fat storage hormone, but a vital signal telling the kidneys to hold on to electrolytes. We dismantled the overly simplistic cholesterol narrative, exploring the nuanced reality that ApoB requires a damaged endothelium to cause harm.
And finally, we pulled back the curtain on the hidden dangers of industrial seed oils, the cumulative toxicity of linoleic acid destroying our mitochondria, and the heavily conflicted, financially motivated history of the institutions that recommended them in the first place.
It is a massive amount of information to digest, but honestly, it is incredibly empowering once you see the matrix for what it is. And that brings us back to where we started.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that broken X-ray machine? The messy, murky landscape of chronic illness with the 36,000 blinking check engine lights. Saladino believes, and the biochemistry supports, that being chronically sick, fatigued, and inflamed is not your destiny. It is not normal.
Absolutely not.
Our birthright as human beings is to be vital, capable, and radically healthy, not just managed by medical pigeonholes and handed a handful of pills to suppress symptoms.
Well said.
So I will leave you with this final thought to mull over. If Brandolini's law is true, if it really takes 10 times the effort to unbrainwash ourselves about nutrition than it did to learn the wrong rules in the first place, ask yourself, what other deeply held truths about your daily life, your energy, or your physical potential have you accepted as absolute fact simply because it was the first thing you were taught?
A fantastic question to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Stay curious, start making those lateral shifts in your pantry today, and we will catch you on the next one.